If I said to you, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the Brazilian Grand Prix? You might immediately think of 2008, 2012, or even Ayrton Senna. If I was then to say to you, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix? You might think of Jordan's last victory, the treacherous conditions, or the endless amount of crashes. So as F1 is heading this weekend to Brazil for the Brazilian Grand Prix, I thought it'd be a good time to have a bit of a trip down memory lane back to that 2003 race, as still to this day it is regarded as one of the greatest races of the 21st century. So this is the story of the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix. The Brazilian Grand Prix was the third round of the 2003 World Championship. The season had already produced quite a turnaround in the form book compared to the year before. That was partly in thanks to major rule changes designed to improve the show and make the sport more competitive. So far in 2003, those changes had delivered as promised. Ferrari's domination that had seen them literally stroll to both World Championships in 2002 was now but a distant memory. Now, everyone could compete with the Scarlet Red cars. On Sunday, April the 6th, 2003, drivers were met with misty grey skies and torrential rain on race day. Usually, rain is no problem for Formula 1 cars. Just fit them with wet weather tyres and they can cope with the conditions. But this was 2003 and there was a major problem. Going back to those rule changes, in order to help save costs, F1 had decided that the teams could only bring one type of wet weather tyre to a race, meaning that they had to choose between an intermediate or full wet. On this occasion, all teams had brought intermediates to Brazil, and given how heavy the rain was, this was dangerous territory. Could you imagine if this was a rule that existed today? Nevertheless, the race was going ahead as planned, albeit behind the safety car, until conditions improved. Before we get into the race action though, this is how the championship looked after 2 rounds. Kimi Raikkonen, in just his third full season, was at the top of the standings on 16 points, after he followed a podium in Melbourne with a first career win in Malaysia. His McLaren teammate David Coulthard was second on 10 points, despite the Scot having retired in Malaysia, but he did win the season opener down under. 5 drivers were then tied on 8 points, including a young Fernando Alonso, who had returned to the grid after spending 2002 on the sidelines as a test driver, and he became the youngest ever pole sitter and podium finisher in Malaysia. Also among those 5 drivers was the reigning champion Michael Schumacher. Michael had endured a tough start to the season, something that he hadn't had to deal with in 2002, where he'd finished every race on the podium and wrapped up his 5th world title in July with 6 races still remaining. Elsewhere, Jordan and their drivers Giancarlo Fisichella and Ralph Furman had yet to register a point in the opening 2 races, as their rapid decline from their late 90s heyday became more and more apparent. Qualifying had thrown up a real humdinger, with the smallest gap between the top 10 drivers on the grid in F1 history, which was only recently matched by Hungary 2023. Another rule change, yes, another mention of those new rules, for 2003 was a 1-lap qualifying, with drivers qualifying in championship order on the Friday, with the slowest in that session going first in the second session on Saturday, and the fastest from Friday going last on the Saturday to form the grid. Home hero Rubens Barrichello had delighted the partisan crowd with pole position, just 11/100ths of a second ahead of Coulthard, and impressive Mark Webber in the Jaguar, who had been faster than Barrichello's time after the first 2 sectors. Championship leader Raikkonen was 4th, less than a 10th off the pole time, while Schumacher could only manage 7th ahead of Fisichella. By the time it came for the Grand Prix to start, the conditions had barely improved. Race director Charlie Whiting delayed the start by 15 minutes to enable standing water to be drained from the circuit. The race started behind the safety car, with some drivers opting to pit under the safety car for fuel, including both Jordans. At the end of lap 8, the safety car was finally called in to the pits and the racing began. Barrichello bunched up the field too close together and paid the price as Coulthard swept through into turn 1. Raikkonen too found his way past the Brazilian a couple of laps later, having already overtaken Webber, and Barrichello's early struggles continued as a fast starting Juan Pablo Montoya, who had started 9th on the grid, passed him at turn 4. By the start of lap 11, Raikkonen had closed rapidly on teammate Coulthard, and despite the plumes of spray, slipped down the inside of DC in a ballsy move to take over the lead of the race. Coulthard then lost momentum out of the Senna S and allowed Montoya to continue his impressive surge through the field. Schumacher meanwhile had been making steady progress, aided by his brother Ralph spinning after contact with Jarno Trulli, and before long he and Webber had further demoted Barrichello, who continued to slip down the order. The circuit was now beginning to slowly dry out, apart from a stream of water that had developed at turn 3, and Coulthard was now back in the groove, firstly retaking second from Montoya, and then he began to close in on Kimi. Montoya then lost another place on lap 16 to Schumacher, who was now looking a real threat to the two McLarens in third. That stream of water at turn 3 would claim its first victim as Minardi rookie Justin Wilson aquaplaned off and into retirement. A safety car would then make its first visit after a right front suspension failure on Furman's Jordan left him careering into the unfortunate Olivier Panis at the first corner and knocking both drivers out of the race. Several drivers took the opportunity to dive into the pits for a new set of tyres and refuel. Race leader Raikkonen, however, opted not to pit and his lead had been wiped out. The race resumed on lap 22, but by lap 25 the rivet at turn 3 had claimed 2 more victims, as Montoya and Pitzonia were left helpless as they both aquaplaned into the barriers in separate incidents. Then, more drama. Schumacher too was caught out by the standing water and spun off into his first retirement in nearly 2 years, showing just how treacherous that part of the circuit was. With 3 cars off in the same part of the circuit, that left the stewards with no choice but to deploy the safety car again. Coulthard now led from Barrichello after McLaren used the safety car window to box Raikkonen. Further back, Jos Verstappen became the latest driver to spin off at turn 3, which Minardi later revealed cost them a potential victory as they had fueled him all the way to the finish. Jenson Button had been quietly making progress and found himself in 5th place, but the BAR joined the world's most expensive car park as he too was caught out by the water at turn 3, triggering a 4th safety car period. Barrichello had now begun to hassle Coulthard for the lead, but he yet to put the Scot under enough pressure to force a mistake. Meanwhile, Webber dramatically spun 360 degrees at the river-laden turn 3, but somehow managed to catch his car before hitting the barriers and rejoined unscathed. On lap 45 on the approach to the Senna S, Coulthard's tyres had begun to wear out, and a small mistake was all Barrichello needed to nip by, causing the whole of the Interlagos crowd to go into pandemonium. Rubinho then began to build a margin over Coulthard, and the first Brazilian driver to win on home soil since Ayrton Senna looked a formality, right up until the moment the dream result was snatched away. Incredibly, just a lap after taking the lead, Barrichello pulled over having run out of fuel. Interlagos literally fell into silence. Both Ferraris wouldn't make it to the checkered flag for the first time since 1998. This allowed Coulthard to resume the lead from teammate Raikkonen, with Fisichella benefiting from his early pit stop to lie third. That was until Coulthard pitted on lap 52 and re-emerged in 4th place, leaving Kimi to hold off Fisi's attack. But a lap later, a snap of oversteer saw him run wide and hand the lead over to Fisichella. Then, a lap later, Webber lost control of his Jaguar on the pit straight, suffering an enormous shunt, leaving his car destroyed beyond repair, and debris had been strewn all over the track. As the safety car was deployed, Fisichella and Raikkonen negotiated their way through the debris, with Kimi diving into the pits. Third place man Alonso was next to come across the wreckage, but failed to notice the yellow flags warning drivers to slow down. This ultimately brought the Brazilian Grand Prix to a premature end, with officials deciding that lap 56 of 71 would be the last. But the question was, who had won? Fisichella, who to add to the bizarre day returned to Parc Fermé with his car on fire, had been leading when the red flag was shown. Was this finally going to be the Italian's long-awaited first win? It seemed the answer would be yes, but then it was announced that Raikkonen was the winner, meaning McLaren had made it 3 wins from 3 in 2003. Fisichella put on a brave face to celebrate his surprise result on the podium, along with Raikkonen, as Alonso had been taken to hospital for further checks after his huge crash. So you're probably thinking that that's where the story ends, right? Well, not quite. Following an investigation into the race result, it was found there had been an error in the timekeeping that hadn't counted Fisichella as starting the 56th lap. So 5 days after the race had ended, Fisi was now declared as the winner, with Raikkonen demoted back to second. McLaren handed over the winning trophies to Jordan at the next round at Imola, and Fisichella could now consider himself as a Grand Prix winner. It would prove to be Jordan's 4th and final win as a constructor in Formula 1, before it bowed out at the end of 2005. And that's the story of the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget that if you are new around here to hit the like button and to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.